Good morning, afternoon, evening to everybody listening, wherever you may be. And thank you very much for joining our opening edition of W.Media FOCUS. This broadcast will be looking at the question of the sustainability in the data center industry, a fashion statement or a passion statement. And to discuss this issue, I'm delighted to welcome two experts from the Asia Pacific region, Mr. Padraig Maccolgain, who is Vice President and Head of APAC at Colt Data Center Services, and Mr. Darren Webb, Co-founder and CEO at Evolution Data Centers. Welcome to you both. Please may I start by asking you both why this question is important. Obviously, a lot of sustainability strategy is based on a how question, i.e., how can I improve? What steps in whatever kind do I have to take? This would seem to me to be more of a why question. Does it make a difference whether it's driven by passion or fashion?
Yeah, look, thank you, Nick. I think it's a great question. I think it comes down to fundamentally where we are as an industry today in data centers across the world. Sustainability, arguably is a relatively new concept to data centers, certainly over the last few years. And it's coincided with enormous growth, not just in data centers, but in the scale of data centers. So you've kind of got the two ends of the axis getting further apart in some ways. So more are happening, but they're taking up more and more power. So, fashion or passion, I think, does it matter? Yes, I think it does matter. So is there an inevitability that all operators have to start looking to operate more sustainably? Of course, I don't think you'll find an operator saying they don't have intentions to operate more sustainably. However, I think it's where it sits in the core of your business. So is it a bolt-on? So something that you've just decided recently that you add on to the way you work, or is it integral to the way you work? And I think that's where you see the difference. So it's certainly also a question of where you are in your business development. So if you've already got lots of data centers already built and operating, actually, arguably, it's quite hard to be sustainable, right? Because those things are in operation. Whereas if you're starting fresh, then it's easier to build a more sustainable data center. So for us, certainly, we see it as a passion, not as a fashion, because a fashion would suggest a trend. This is a passion in the sense of it's something that has to keep happening. It's an iterative process. It's a journey. It doesn't have an end point and it doesn't have a start point. What you need to have is to care about the way you as an operator are holistically part of the environment you work in. So, for instance, I'll give you one kind of thing. PUE is an example. Is the way we've measured data centers for the last 15, 20 years. That's fine, but that's talking about the efficiency of power inside a data hall. I think as operators now, we need to look at holistically how we are as part of the environment we work in. So all the way from the land use, from the way we are part of the community to our energy use, all of those things become important rather than just PUE as a single metric.
I do think it is somewhat fashionable. There is a trend in the market. All you have to do is open up any industry magazine or website and you see lots of articles about it. So it is, as you would say, a hot topic. However, if you're not passionate about it, I don't think you can be successful in achieving the goals of sustainability. I don't think it's a quick fix. I don't think it's an easy win. I think it takes quite a long time and quite a lot of effort. And, I think Darren made a very good point about the difference between existing data centers and new data centers and how they have to be treated differently. And, it is easier to look at the new data center, look at the material, look at the transport, look at how the efficiency of that data center is more than a data center that's already in existence. But at the same time, you do have to do both, and you do have to be passionate about it in order to be able to achieve those things. So I think that, from our point of view as a data center operator, we are very passionate about it. The last 4 or 5 years, we've put a lot of resources and a lot of people into this sustainability. And we don't see it as a quick fix. We do see it as a long-term program that we're working on, and that we plan to continue to work on, for the next 15, 20 years or more.
I mean, obviously, sustainability is not just energy efficiency in a data center. That's probably the key one, but it covers lots of the of ESG activities, in environment, social, and governance issues. When you think about it in relation to data centers, which are the core ones? Is it just energy in the data center, energy consumption in the data center? What are the other ones that are important for the industry to bring into this discussion, if you like? Padraig, can I start you on this question,
Sure.
please?
And that's a great point, because I think when you talk about social, it really involves community. And what we're seeing
Yes.
is, more and more data centers are coming up in certainly, I'm speaking from Japan, so it's the area that I know most about. Big construction projects, and when we build data centers and we talk to people in the community, they don't always know what data centers are. They see these rather large buildings going up, not many windows, security fences, equipment that they're not used to seeing. So I think as part of the social part, it is important to engage with the community and make sure people understand, what actually data centers are and why they are important. And certainly from our point of view, we've been trying to do that, from early engagement to life cycle engagement. We also, do stuff like making sure that we have, community cleanup programs and community outreach programs, which,
Yes.
frankly speaking, 5-10 years ago, we weren't doing as much. And it was because the ESG now is so important, and as the more we delve into it, the more deeper that we try to get involved, the more we see. And for the other point regarding governance, governance is critical. There's a lot of regulation. I think there's going to be more regulation, and I think regulation is going to be necessary. A lot of the sustainability goals today, companies like ourselves, we have science-based targets. We take it on as our responsibility to do that. But in order to achieve the goals of, the Paris Climate Accord and subsequent accord, more and more regulation will be required. More companies like ourselves will have to do more reporting and more engagement with the governance around that.
Okay, Patrick, that's great. Thank you. And Darren, can I build on a point that Patrick has just made? Because when I started doing research into data centers, which would have been probably about 17 or so years ago, outside the industry, relatively few people knew what they were. Perhaps more in America than in Europe, which was where I was then based. Would you say, Darren, that is now changing? Padraig has talked about building a profile of a data center within a local community. And would you say that that's changing, that there is a greater awareness among a wider sector of the population than before?
No, I'm not necessarily sure.
Darren?
I wouldn't necessarily say it's much wider. As Padraig said, these are big buildings with no windows, okay, some strange equipment. If you look what's happened, I pick Ireland as an example. I'm sure somewhere Padraig knows well, and I know well. There was not riots, but there was issues outside data centers, people complaining about them. And I'm not suggesting that they don't have a right to do that. And what I would say is they're probably uneducated. I wouldn't say misinformed, probably uneducated in terms of what does that data center do. So, for instance, the building is not the one taking power, right? It's not choosing to take power. It's reacting to consumer and enterprise and government demand. And in that particular situation, the irony, of course, is that that those issues would have been predicated and generated through Facebook and through WhatsApp and social media, and photos would have been taken and stored multiple times. And so I don't think there's an understanding that the building is not a bad thing, right? The building is not doing anything wrong. we have to look at ourselves as consumers to say, what are we doing with our own behavior to either limit content or to not limit content, to store or to not store. As I said, the building and the operator, regardless of who it is just reacting to is just fulfilling demand, which ultimately we create. So I think I don't want to say people are I don't want to say people are wrong for having concerns about the power consumption, but I do find irony in the fact that we're the very people that generate the power consumption in the first place.
Yes, I mean we're part of a chain, aren't we? Really, part of the way that data travels between all of the points around the globe, and store it and process it as well. Okay, going back to passion and fashion, are there any types of data center that you would identify as belonging to one of those two groups, i.e. those driven by passion versus those driven by fashion? I mean, we talked before about a new data center as a different proposition to an existing data center. Padraig, could you share your thoughts on that, please?
I think that all data centers have to be in the passion bucket. I don't think a data center that is built on a trend or built on something that is transitory will be very successful. I think you really have to be passionate about it, and you really have to understand where that data center fits within the community. It will, as Darren mentioned, take a lot of power. People will upload a lot of their data to a data center. It will become a very intrinsic part, integral part of the community. So I think it's very important to understand that, and that it will be there for quite some time. So anything that is fashionable, I assume that it is kind of a shorter, temporary type of item. But in terms of data centers where, we have one data center now that's 22 years old, we've other data centers that are 6 months old, So I think all of them are going to be, around for quite some time. And, in order to deliver that, you really do have to be passionate about it. Point about the existing data centers versus new data centers. Well, there's still quite a lot you can do with existing data centers. As you go through the life cycle of replacing equipment, you can move to equipment that use less electricity, that are more efficient, use less water, put in better insulation, better cooling systems. And as you go through the life cycle, these are the things that you have to do if you are passionate about your data centers.
Nick, let me answer the same question a slightly different way. Not that I agree with what Padraig said, but I'll answer it differently. So I certainly see some really good behavior from a number of operators. This is not just a single case, but some operators have clearly moved to declaring their scope 1, or at least trying to declare their scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, setting STI standards. And that's great, right? I think that's where the industry is moving to. I'll call out one, not that I'm in any way related to them, but Aligned out of the US, they announced that they would declare their full scopes. And that's something at Evolution we support and we intend to do ourselves. And then on the other end of the spectrum, I would say there's still a lot of pretty poor behavior in our industry. And it's partly because we don't have the governance that Padraig mentioned earlier too. Certainly in Asia, in Europe, where it's a single market, the EU are pretty clear on this stuff, and there's standards to follow, and there's challenges to your business if you don't. But in Asia, let's face it, we don't have that. It's a lot of countries all applying their own standards or not, and it's probably unlikely we ever have a single standard across all the markets, right? I don't think that's a realistic ambition. So here we see a lot of operators still relying on RECs as their answer to driving more sustainable data centers. To that, I say, rubbish. That's not helping, right? That's not helping emissions. So if you're applying a financial REC in Jakarta, as an example, that you purchase, let's say in the US, can someone tell me how that impacts the emissions in Jakarta? And the reality is it doesn't, I don't believe. So I think the sooner that we get away from the industry of using RECs, certainly in countries where organic renewable energy is available, which is many parts of Asia, not all, but the sooner we get away from that as the default position for how I become a green data center, and you know that I don't like that phrase, the better, because I think it actually allows for some pretty poor behavior and just allows it to become marketing spin, which makes it back to being a fashion rather than a passion. So, I think operators going forward can't rely on RECs. I don't think the CSPs will allow for it. And I actually personally think, for the sake of the planet, the sooner we move away from them, not in entirety, they still have a place to play, but as the default go-to, that's how I answer the sustainability question. I do believe the better for the industry. I do believe the better for the planet.
One thing with sustainability and the research I've done, it's suggested that if you don't know how well you're doing, then you're likely to fall off a bit more. If you can say we wanted to do this and we've got there, now we move on to the second stage, the third stage, because it's never going to all be done in one hit across all of the types of sustainable behavior. What do you think are the key drivers that matter within a company? What are the key things that will make a data center owner or operator say, right, I've got to think more carefully about this range of issues associated with sustainability? What works, in your opinion? Padraig, would you like to take that one?
Thank you. So I think, the old adage, if you can't measure something, you can't manage it, is quite applicable here. And I think measuring,
Yes,
how companies are doing both internally and externally is going to become more important. We obviously have our science-based targets, that we're aiming to achieve. They're not easy, but we are determined to go and achieve them. And in addition to that, I think there's several other aspects that are going to drive this behavior within companies. One is obviously going to be investors. People vote with their feet. When people invest in whatever funds or whatever they want to, a lot of the times people look for sustainable funds, green funds. And these are going to become more and more important in the market. I think when we go to hire new people, especially when we look for young people coming out of university or people in their early careers, one of the questions they ask at the interview is, what's your policy on sustainability? Where are you? How are you going to achieve it? And you find out that certainly from my day, people are a lot more clued in and a lot more knowledgeable about the subject, and they want the answers. And as you said yourself, customers are driving this. Customers have a very good understanding about what they need to achieve and how they want to achieve it, and they expect their suppliers to do it as well. So I'd say, investors, employees, and customers are the three main drivers behind it.
Yeah, and I'll just pick up
Excellent.
on the last point.
Thank you.
I agree with everything, but I pick up on the customer point. We're all clear that the large CSPs, or all CSPs, but certainly the big 3 or 4 out of the US and out of China have all made very public commitments to sustainability in terms of their carbon footprint. And they're public companies, and back to Padraig's point, people will start voting with their feet. So those big cloud providers do not want to miss their own targets. One, because that's they've set them and they want to achieve, but two, because it has a public knock-on impact, right? Which potentially could become share impact if they miss a target. So as operators, frankly, whether it's a passion or a fashion, we have to do this, right? Because our customers are going to demand it. And so, I would argue it's better to be integral to your business than be a bolt-on, because if it's something you passionately care about as well, it's going to be easy for you to build your business around. Whereas it's just something I've got to do. It seems like a bit of a drag on the business, right? So, for us, of course, as a new operator, it's easier to be core to our business. I think some are struggling with bringing it onto an existing business that's been successful for 10, 15 years. And now they have to do this sustainability thing. And I can see why that can be a challenge, right? It being a challenge to bring into your culture. It can be a challenge when you're hiring. You know, as Padraig, you know, I've had interviews recently where people have been looking at me saying, "Oh, okay, I just wanted to check whether you were using, you know, single-use plastics in your office or whether you were using recyclable." You know, it's serious. This is what's happening as you start interviewing these days, and it's the right thing to do, right? It makes you think, wow, we've got to change some behavior. And that's not easy to do for a certain generation or for an industry that's kind of 15, 20 years old.
Yeah, and I'd say on top of what Darren just said, that you really have to get out in front of this issue. If you wait for it to become like the main item for anyone making a decision, you're already too late. You have, as a company and as a data center operator, you have to get out in front, and you have to start making decisions before, you know, they become the market norm.
Okay, understood. And can I ask about, we've talked about the relationship between the data center and the world outside, if you like, clients and the public and government and other players. Within companies, in terms of getting that commitment, again, the major cloud players, it seems to be almost part of their branding, their identity, this pursuit of sustainability, and they devote considerable resources to it. How would you sell in the idea of a sustainable data center across a number of aspects to a potential client looking maybe to move out of their own data center to yours, as I'm sure happens? What are the key points? What are the key things they should be looking for? What are the key points that you would convince them on?
Well, look, for us,
Patrick?
Padraig's mentioned again, you know, it's not just power, but I'll come back to that. But your use of materials, your use of design, efficiency, you know, there's plenty of aspects. What I would say for us, for Evolution, I don't talk for anyone else, the ability to secure renewable energy, we believe, is a key differentiator. Why? Because it fundamentally reduces your carbon footprint. It fundamentally reduces your scope emissions. And that's not to suggest, you know, using recycled materials or where you source, or, you know, that they're all important. You should do them all, right? But in terms of impact, we believe that securing renewable energy is key. So, you know, when we started Evolution 3 years ago, we deliberately picked markets in Asia which were emerging, but also had organic renewable energy. So we could bring those two things together, that maturing market, that cloud adoption, and renewable energy. And the last thing I say is, yeah, we almost got through a talk without mentioning AI, but I did it, so you can blame me. As AI happens, as AI deploys in Asia, it's going to change the dynamics again. You know, if you're talking about 100 megawatt data centers, as an example, which, you know, today there's still very few of that size in Asia. There are some, but not in the emerging markets. There's kind of inevitability, and people may disagree. There's inevitability that those sites would have chased land and connectivity. They would have been the kind of the key things they chased. I think it changes. I think those sites start chasing power and green power at that. So whereas before you could just connect to the grid, I think customers will be saying, I've got 100 megawatts as an example for AI. I need that to be in a location where I can get green power. Why? Because frankly, if I connect it just to the grid, my scope emissions will be pretty bad. If I connect it to green power, you know, I'll reduce them by maybe 70%. So we see that we see that as a kind of must do going forward, that the large rollouts have to be where there's green power available.
Okay, yes. So to deal with the increasing density of data centers as AI gets accommodated within them. Padraig, your thoughts on this, please.
Yeah, I think AI is going to be a big inflection point. I'm not sure exactly today, you know, what form it will take, you know, here in Japan, but I think, yes, it will continue to grow the data center industry in Japan. And as Darren says, you know, we do need the renewable power in the industry to be more green and more sustainable. The challenge we have in Japan is that it's not as easy to get renewable power, and a lot of people are working hard with the government and in industry, to provide offshore power where it's available. Solar power has a real challenge due to the mountainous landscape. But yeah, I think we do need that, but it is a challenge going forward. I think if you talk about certain countries that have wide open spaces, Nick, you might be in one. Solar power can be harnessed quite easily, but in other countries, it's not so easy. But Darren's 100% correct. The renewable power is one of the key aspects of reducing your emissions. One of our goals is to have a PPA with additionality, so that we can get renewable power. But it is a challenge for us here in Japan.
It's actually quite fascinating, Nick, at the moment. The traditional, and this is not criticism at all, the traditional tier 1 markets, and if you particularly think of the 2 hubs of Singapore and Hong Kong, that they've got a challenge coming up, frankly. They're always going to have the connectivity, the subsea cables particularly, but they're land scarce and they don't have renewable energy, right? So there's a clear dynamic shift that has to happen, because you couldn't do a 100 megawatt data center in either of those markets today. You couldn't get the land, and you couldn't get the power, and you couldn't get green energy. So it's a pretty, there's a shift coming. And if you see particularly the growth in JB as a kind of now a substitute for Singapore, that shift has happened. And once it happens, it doesn't come back, right? That power, that storage doesn't come back to Singapore in the future. Now, I'm not an expert on Japan at all. Clearly it doesn't have the same challenges from a land availability as Singapore and Hong Kong. But there is a shift in terms of, wow, we need to have land, but we need that energy, and we need it to be green. And that is going to start proving a problem for quite a few of the traditional markets.
Yeah, and just to talk a bit more about Japan, the challenge here, Japan doesn't have a lot of natural resources. It imports most of its energy. Most of it is LNG that is powering the electricity. If we went back before the Fukushima disaster, 13 years ago, we would have seen more than 30% of the power being nuclear. Now it went down to like 3%, and I believe it's just under 10%. So the Japanese public is very against having nuclear power. It's been a real challenge every time they try to bring up a nuclear power station. But I think for long-term energy security, Japan will have to go back to nuclear in some form, but it will be a very unpopular decision by whichever government takes it.
Okay, so some sources suggest that the approach that you're both suggesting, and I mean, by no means are you alone in that. I think there's a consensus that you have to look at sources of power that are renewable and sustainable. But research I did suggests that problems with the storage of power are still presenting a bit of a challenge, and that will be particularly true of the 2 markets you've just spoken of, Hong Kong and Singapore, and also the getting it from A to B. I mean, I think the ideal for most renewables is to have it somewhere very close to where the data center is. You're reading of Midwest America where there's nuclear power adjacent to a data center. So that's probably taking it slightly to the nth degree, but it sounds, that if you look at all of the solar panels on the hills around Brisbane, they're not necessarily for data centers, or some of them are, but it's a fairly short trip to get them to where they're going to be used. I think Singapore was trying to buy renewably sourced energy from Northern Australia, and I think Australia then decided it needed the power for itself, so that didn't happen. But I believe also that there were issues of how you get it there, and you have a reasonable proportion of it left. Okay, just in terms of what we've discussed today, we've covered a couple of questions in a great deal of good detail. So thank you both for that. Could I ask you to think about how you would help companies develop a sustainability strategy in terms of their data centers? Thinking of a couple of the types that you mentioned, if you think of a company that's just coming into the market, just building its first data center, and that's happening a bit now. What would your advice be at this early stage of their data center's life in terms of what you look at, and how do you make sure that it's kind of going to give real outcomes rather than just, a few positive lines in the media somewhere?
So Padraig, I'll let Padraig answer, because he'll be giving me the answer to my own question, right? As a new operator building our first data center. So please, Padraig, tell me how to do it.
Okay. Well, I'll give it a shot. But I mean, what we've learned in recent years, we've been filling out GRESB certification, to get measurement of, how our data centers are doing, in terms of sustainability, both in terms of ourselves, but also in terms of our peers in the market. And what I've learned is that it really starts with the design. If you have your data center up and running or being built, then you've missed a big portion of what you can do. So it starts with the design, it starts with the material, it starts with the local material, and it starts with the community outreach. So if I was, when we are building new data centers, we look at, how we can be sustainable from the very beginning, and the material that's used, the efficiency of the equipment, and also, the transportation of the equipment.
Okay.
So I agree with that. Our answer is slightly different way, just to give it a different feel. So for us, I would say, if someone in a similar situation to us, a new operator coming into markets that are less mature, I would say the advice to give yourself is be hungry in terms of not taking the easy option. Right, the easiest option today in many of the emerging markets is still just to connect to the grid and say, I did what everyone else did. I'm taking brown power, but either the regulatory environment doesn't exist for me to do a PPA, which is in fact the case in most Asian markets. So, it wasn't my problem, right? It wasn't my problem. I still did a bit of, I looked at the materials, looked at design, and so I've done what I could do. So we, as an example, next week we'll announce an MOU to secure future access to additive power, renewable power in both Thailand and Vietnam. We didn't have to do that. We've done it because we want to show that sustainability is important to us, and we want to have something to go, okay, it's not just, you can't just say it's important, show me some real things that you've done. So having a PPA in the Philippines and MOUs in Thailand and Vietnam in our markets is a way of saying to our customers, we truly do care about securing renewable energy, and this is how we're going to do it. And from a regulatory point of view, even if it doesn't allow for it today, which is the case in Thailand, as an example, we're working along with the Data Center Council in Thailand to try to influence government policy to allow for that direct PPA takeoff. So that's not just going to benefit Evolution, that's going to benefit anyone that's operating in that market. And I think that's the key here. No operator is going to solve this together. It is going to require the operators and the cloud service providers to come together to say, this new technology is happening that will improve all of our carbon footprint, or this is, we want to influence government policy to allow for us all to buy direct from generators. So, I think there's an inherent requirement on us to come together as an industry. But part of that is transparency and auditability and integrity, frankly, and in terms of saying, okay, I'm not going to just go for RECs. I'm going to go for the hard road. I'm going to go for the one which says it might take me 2 or 3, 4 years to secure that renewable energy, but I know I've got to do it. I know my customers want it. And actually, it's what I need to do anyway for my business.
In terms of the energy efficiency and the PUE metric that is used, is that kind of sufficient? Does that fit into the new world of energy scrutiny, if you like?
I think it's one metric that you do need to monitor, and you do need to measure, and you do need to manage. It's not the only measure, but you definitely still need to know how much energy that you're using compared to how much is going to your white space. But as Darren has mentioned in our previous conversation, it's not just power; it's also water. It's also other consumables that you have in a data center, and you do need to consider everything as a whole, because you can certainly reduce your power usage by increasing your water usage and vice versa, and so you do need to make sure that you are having a holistic view of your data center and how much of everything that you're using. So yes, PUE is important, but it's only one metric. 15 years ago, it might have been the only metric, but it's no longer the case.
Yeah, I can't add much more than that, other than an impassioned plea for the industry to stop using PUE as the de facto way of comparing us. It's frankly a bit ridiculous. It's outdated. It's important, but it's one of 10, 15 metrics that you need to look at. For me, carbon footprint way trumps PUE now, because it's an holistic view of how you operate in that environment, right? And ultimately, as the world tries to stick to limiting the increase in heat, I don't really think anyone cares about the heat within inside a data hall when you look at it from that holistic view of the world. So, we need to not move away from it, but we need to stop making it the de facto one. And I think move to carbon footprint. That's got to be the future overall way of looking at it. But Padraig said, a perfect example. You can mess around with your WE by reducing your PUE, but water arguably will be a scarce resource in many countries going forward as much as power. So which one's more important?
Yeah. Okay. All right. I think we're now moving into sort of time added on, if you like. Could I ask you to project forward, if this, hypothetically, this discussion were taking place in 5, 6, 7 years, would we be talking about the same things in relation to passion and fashion? Would we be having the same discussions? What will have changed by then, do you think?
From my point of view, I expect the regulation to have changed. I expect the governance to have changed. I think all the things that Darren and myself have mentioned, they'll no longer be an option. I think a lot of them will become mandatory under the regulation that will be demanded. I'm not sure how many countries had a cool summer last year, but certainly Japan had the hottest summer ever. And I was here for it all. So from July to the end of September, there wasn't a day that didn't go below 30 degrees. I've never experienced anything in my life. And I think, the continuation of this will drive people to drive their politicians for better regulation. So I think when we have this discussion in 5 or 7 years or whatever, we will be talking about how we are managing to implement the regulation in the short time frame that we've been given. And companies who have started early and have tried, as Darren mentioned, get their renewable energy in early, and also get, the other parts of their sustainable program in early, they'll be ahead of the game. But I think very much we'll be talking about that in 5 to 7 years.
Yeah, look, I think we won't be there in 5, 7 years. The optionality of being sustainable won't exist, right? You will either be sustainable or you won't be sustainable, and if you're not sustainable, you'll be out of business, right? So if you think of data centers, and we all know as operators, a customer never leaves you, right? Unless your performance is, from an SLA point of view, is so bad, right? Even for commercial reasons, they very rarely leave you. It's normally just because the operation is so bad. I actually believe that's going to change, because as those CSPs particularly and enterprises chase that more sustainable data center because they need it to contribute to their own commitments, I think people will be leaving, right? So that forces, I think it will force some operators to go out of business, actually. So I don't think the optionality of which we have today, are you sustainable, aren't you sustainable, will be there. We'll have different challenges. We have, new technology will always push the boundary. So, Asia arguably is at the back end of technology development. I'll probably exclude China from that. But if you look at in the US today, they can do non-diesel gen sets, right? And of course, there are examples of using biofuels in other parts of the world, but that will become standard. But then there'll be another challenge to say, how do we solve for this? So, for instance, in Asia, one of the things we struggle from is how do we reuse our excess heat, right? Because we basically live in humid countries, not everywhere, but the vast majority is humid. We need to solve for that, right? But it's low grade heat. But so some technology needs to come along to say, okay, there's a use for that, and then it will solve that. But then there'll be another problem to solve, and that's my point being, it's an iterative journey. There's no end point. You have to keep pushing the boundaries of technology. You have to keep allowing for. I think regulation will play a core part. But you also have to continue to have that passion to say, we want to be part of the new world. We want to constantly be iterative. We want our next project to be better than our last project. And if you take that approach, you'll become greener, right? Rather than this kind of mad concept that we have today, which is we're brown and now some people are saying we're green. How are you green? I don't get it. You become greener. You become better. So we have to I think we have to reestablish what the parameters are we're working on, which is to be iteratively better.
Okay, Darren, thank you. That probably also made a very nice end statement. Could I please pass over to Padraig? Just some final thoughts from you on what you would like to say to the audience in terms of what we discussed today. Particularly, I think, in terms of the thinking, because the question rather suggests, fashion versus passion, that it's about the way that it's driven, the way that companies are thinking.
Yeah, I think, my first-hand experience is my own company. And, over the last 5 years, we started our own sustainability department. It's now very active in every market we're in Europe, in India, and in Japan. It's driving the story. It's not just something that is there that we can wheel out whenever we need it. The team is very active and very engaged in every part of our business. So I think that we'll see more of that going forward. I think that the sustainable department in every data center company will have more and more impact or emphasis on what that data center company does. And I think that's only going to be a positive thing.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very, very much. And thank you both very much for the insights, the experience, the inspiration that you've talked about today. I mean, it was very, very interesting and beneficial to listen to you both. So on behalf of W.Media, thank you for taking part in this W.Media Focus. And thank you, all of you out there, for listening into this broadcast as well. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.